People who grew up rich, when did you realize you were living in a bubble and not like everyone else? Rich is relative. I grew up in a trailer park, so definitely not well off. Made a new friend one day and invited him over for dinner. Kid was blown away by the size of the hamburgers we were eating. And you could have another one if you wanted. Just typical 1/3 lb or so patties. And we were poor, but they were rationing serving sizes poor. We had HVAC. They didn't even have window units. We didn't have holes in our floor ceilings. It rained inside and out at their place. We definitely need to be reminded of stuff like this more. I wouldn't say I'm rich, but I can go to a store and afford whatever food I want. So actually yeah, I am rich. Thanks for that. Little wins. I had a similar story. I invited a classmate and his younger brother to play together in my grandparents' backyard. They both couldn't believe how big the house was and how amazing it was inside. Most people I know would refuse to live there even if someone paid them for it. The house was old. Everything was made by my grandpa and was terrible quality. It didn't have holes or anything, but everything inside was just so old and it smelled old too. It wasn't even big, just a standard house. My mum always hated going there even for a few minutes because it was so much worse than our apartment, but my grandparents didn't mind. They actually had money to renovate it but didn't want to. I couldn't understand why anyone would like it so much until he told me they never had their own house and had to rent a tiny flat in the worst neighborhoods and also moved from one place to another every few months. Basically, a 6-person family in 2 tiny rooms with a tiny bathroom, and they had to share clothes and couldn't afford anything. I haven't heard from them in a while, but I think they're good now because their father got a decent job in Belgium, and I even saw the oldest brother has an iPhone, and overall every brother has their own brand new clothes and stuff. Wish I could upvote this more. That is so sad. When I went to college and had friends who were complaining about student loans. Same here. I remember when I started seeing a girl at uni and she said she had loans. I asked her why she didn't just ask her parents for money. Grew up a lot that day. You still don't get it, do you? Narrator. He did not. In my experience, people can't fathom it until they truly don't have those lifelines and support networks. It is devalued, but she should have done it in her head and not out loud to you. M8. She was right though, but also she sounds rude. Not that I'd expect an enormous world perspective from Joey Jewels, but this is such an obnoxiously immature and clueless comment. She's technically right, but in a rude kind of way that makes you better off without her. Sounds like she's better off without him. Because his money defines him. Comma bitch, I could have spent that money on myself. I rest my case, Your Honor. Just wait till they're 10 years out from college and still paying them. I'm not sure the American people fully grasp how bad the student loan crisis really is. Spending time in the personal finance subreddit, it's clear there are one of 3 issues: a car they can't afford, credit card debt, or absolutely insane student loan debt. I didn't go to college, not by choice, by necessity, and with each passing year I am increasing grateful that I didn't. 400, 600, 800 a month payments? I don't know how this is going to be sustainable. Spoiler alert, it isn't. Imagine thinking that this is a thing. Get a real job, great. You hiring? I pay $1,000 a month in minimum payments. Last month my wife and I were ecstatic because we paid $4,700, but still managed to keep our emergency fund savings above our minimum levels. I still have over $65,000 in student loans and am trying to save for a wedding. 10. I am 25 years out of college and still paying. How is that even possible? 25 years ago college was like $3,000 a year. I went to a technical college for electronics as I thought that would have the best chance of having a good job. so it wasn't cheap compared to a community college entry-level jobs. When I got out was for shit I was doing in my basement at 13. I had to use the funds on what I could and had to pay the private loans, which couldn't be deferred. I also needed, in addition to the government loans, I got royally screwed on my government grants because my father, which hadn't supported me in any way in years, had to be included in my application. So majority of my college funds were loans as I had no money at all. I unfortunately didn't understand the gravity of what I was doing at the time because all I wanted to do was go to school, and I did whatever anybody told me I needed to do to accomplish that. In hindsight, I would have never gone to college here. I'm 31 and am a slave to my student debt. Luckily the burden will be going down a lot within the next couple of years as I am getting some of them paid off, but I refinance some of them to get my interest down and will be paying them off until I'm 40. I was talking to a friend about going to the town's public beach and they were saying how horribly crowded it gets in summer, and I suddenly realized, I was well into my 20s, that I had never had to go to a public beach because I always had at least 2 private family beaches to go to, one with cabanas, outdoor showers and space for cooking. I always had taken it for granted. Dang dude, congrats on having a family that's loaded. That's a healthy dose of salty. More salt than the seawater at the beach. Likewise, it blows my mind that there are people with private beaches, like a whole section of the ocean is someone's personal backyard. So crazy. It must be such an interesting way to live, honestly. I was about 12, I think. When friends would come over they would go on and on about how big the house was and how I had more games and computers and shit than them. They especially seemed freaked out about the maid, and I just started to realize that I didn't have the same circumstances as most. They wouldn't all say it if it weren't true, I assume. I did have other friends with money, especially when I started attending private school, but I didn't realize they were well off either. I had the same. I didn't have too many friends growing up, and the friends I had were usually from poorer homes, and it really messed with me when they said things like oh my god, YRHOU says H huge and YOU guys are so Luke Kai. Like, I'm not going into your house and saying oh my god, YRHOU says so S more. Being the young kid I was, when friends said this sort of thing, it made me feel guilty of a way of life that I didn't choose. Why is this getting downvoted? I'm simply stating how I felt as a kid. Did I say something wrong? Most of Reddit is poor college kids that can only afford to eat rice with tackable packets. The way you responded made it seem that them making you feel guilty because they envied your situation was on par with you pointing out their shitty situation. It isn't the same at all. While you are feeling guilty in a really nice house, your friends are going to go back to being poor at their house making do with less. Anyways, here's an upvote. How you feel is valid, just know that you are better off than most and appreciate what you have. This is explained perfectly. I'm shocked at how much poverty can mold people. I grew up worrying about being homeless every month, yet my dad did his best to provide. Makes me really value financial security above all else. The first time I went to my best friend's house, his circumstances were the exact opposite. His parents tried their best, but his dad often didn't have much work during the winter, and his mom didn't work outside of the home. They had 6 kids, and usually had things like pancakes for dinner. I'm in an upper class part of DC, with every toy and electronic imaginable, and he had none. It was a good lesson for me to learn, but it was a shame that it was at the expense of a person I love so very much. I was in your friend's position growing up and now my kids are in your position. I'm hoping my kids learn how well they have things comparatively. Are you still friends with that person? Unfortunately no. He went missing shortly after our high school graduation. His car was found on the side of a little used stretch of road. The car was still running. The driver's side door was open, and his wallet was on the front seat. His parents had him declared dead about 7 years later. I was broken for a while. and I think I kept in contact with the detective working the case for updates more than his own family did. It sounds like you may have grown up similarly to how my parents did. They lived in poverty when they were kids, but had more money than they could spend by the time I came along. I benefited a lot from their sweat. I'm truly sorry about your friend. What's wrong with pancakes for dinner? I used to have that a lot. Was I poor? It's a question of why it was for dinner. For me, with a solidly middle-class upbringing, it was a treat. All of the benefits of breakfast without having to wake up in time for breakfast. Mom, same, likes it because it's different and an easy meal. But for Dad, who grew up very poor, pancakes for dinner was sometimes a several times a week occurrence as his parents couldn't afford to feed themselves and their 7 kids on 3-4 full-time minimum wage jobs in the 60s. He puts up with it sometimes, but to him pancakes for dinner is associated with poverty and shame, so we only did that maybe 1-2 times a year. In Sweden, pancakes is a dinner food. We were about 10 when we met, but it took a long time to be invited to his house. He always had some excuse as to why we couldn't hang out there, and wanted to be at our house instead. When I finally went, I don't think I quite understood completely, but my dad had a long conversation with me about it, and his and my mom's own upbringing. He got very popular in high school, but never wanted his parents to come to anything. I think years of feeling less than internally affected him negatively. He felt embarrassed by them. It sounds odd, I know, but sometimes I think being his best friend did more damage to him. We were very close, but he often compared his situation to mine. So this happened young. My dad worked in IT, international company, bunch of business trips to like every major country in the world and every major developing country. He got fired, company filed for bankruptcy. This happened whilst I was 8. Suddenly the only income we had was from my mum, working in the public sector for the state, helping mentally ill people. We went from expensive toys, Nutella for breakfast and expensive lunch items to buying birthday presents at basically dollar stores and hoping for hand-me-downs so that I could get clothes that fit me. Whenever we had a school trip, we had to save up 2 years in advance and ask relatives for help paying for those school trips. Maybe not see relatives that lived far away for birthdays and other important things. My dad only got a job after 9 years of looking. My teen years consisted of hand-me-down clothes, worrying about social events and lunch. I still haven't grown out of the mentality despite my dad having a well-paying job now. It's crazy what the 2008 crisis did. I was thinking, it took your dad 9 years to find a new job, then I read 2008 financial crisis and X200B, and it all made sense. I came out of college '08 full of youthful exuberance and looking to finally make some dollar. I physically handed out 300 plus copies of my CV, not a single reply. He sent a CV to every IT job in my country, even sent some in Sweden. They wouldn't take him. 40 plus, used to be the union representative, he now works as a post officer. Employers may have ducked him over because he was a union rep. This discrimination may be illegal, but it's not uncommon. Authoritarians hate unions. We basically live in 1934 Germany or 1928 Italy. Are the corporates gassing people by the thousands? No, and as long as it's more profitable for them to have peace, they won't. But if you scratch a corporate capitalist, a fascist bleeds. Authoritarianism is authoritarianism, plain and simple. Basically, the boss blamed all the employees for something, mainly the bankruptcy. My dad, being the union rep, took all the blame and said that they had done nothing wrong. That got him blacklisted for basically every major company. It's so ducking scummy that the company would have fired 200 plus people until my dad stepped up. He's pissed about it, but he was proud of himself for defending his colleagues and their future job prospects. So it's a mix of scummy hate towards unions and the crash in 2008. My dad only got a job after 9 years of looking. I thought it was reasonable to bail out the banks in 2008, because I expected the economy to go back to normal, but it never did. The recession was mild in numeric terms, but the job market collapsed and never came back. They should have let the whole thing collapse. Whatever Great Depression it led into would be over by now, likely with no worse results except for the very rich. A society in which 9-year job searches are possible does not deserve to survive into the next decade. And then imagine, your small country, your economy relies on investors and trade. You're not like any huge country, you have to wait for the rest of the world to recover, somewhat, before you can recover yourself. Some fields of work still suffer, like finance. This made me realize how old I'm getting. I was thinking the 80s recession threw your whole thing. Then you pop up with the 2008 crisis and I was taken aback. LOL. Well, I'm glad your family is doing better now. 2008 ducked a lot of us over. Fellow students with me are either on the dole or working 0-hour temp jobs, even to this day. Define growing up rich. My dad didn't start making real money until I was at least 10 or 11. We were comfortably middle class before that. I guess it started when we moved to a new city and people in my school would openly tease me about being rich. I think the first thing I started noticing was that we took a big annual family vacation, usually on a plane, while many of my friends have never flown before. Wasn't rich but realized I was far better off than I was led to believe when I tried filling out FAFSA forms to go to college. My mother freaked when I told her I needed income information. Turns out, she'd been lying about our financial state for years and didn't want to see any of that money spent on college for any of her 5 kids. I found out that we were far poorer than I'd believed when I finally convinced my dad I needed our tax info to fill out the FAFSA. He was straight up refusing to give it to me for a while. Conversely, I remember a summer where me and my mom lived in a car and I thought it was the coolest thing. Turns out we were just homeless. Meanwhile in university there was a guy who didn't understand why we didn't all have our own condos right by the school. He also never understood why we didn't have money to go to Mexico on wedding break and would just tell us to ask for a bigger allowance from our trust. He learned to just stop talking after someone fed him a left hook when he made a comment about how stupid we are for taking our student loans and not just paying tuition up front. More upper middle class. Since I started using Reddit, especially reading AskReddit posts, I've been realizing more and more every day how fortunate I am. Same here. Makes me really appreciate my parents. They're not perfect, but they beat a lot of these other parents by a lot, and they care a ton, sometimes too much. I have a family member that grew up with a private jet. The first time she flew commercial she turned to her family and asked, who are all these people on our plane? On flying I'm no way rich, but I was reading that the majority of the world's population, over 90%, didn't take one flight last year. I'm not sure if that's true. I'll look for the post, but that hit me pretty hard how fortunate I am to fly to see family sometimes. Who are all these people on our plane? Wow, that's pretty detached from reality. Your reality, not hers. Do you own or have access to a private car? Lots of people don't. It's all relative. I get your point, but if I'm on a bus I'm not gonna say why are all these people are on our bus. The thing is that you aren't used to your family always driving around in your private bus. Which is precisely the point Op was making. They are further detached from reality because even though we have access to private things, we still understand the underlying general ideas of how people in the world move around in public transportation. Not knowing that commercial aviation is a thing, and assuming she was older than 5, does not make her affluent, it makes her quite stupid emo. Also, I've heard this why are there people on this plane story so many times. I'm starting to wonder if it's an urban legend. It's like let them eat cake, which Marie Antoinette never said. I believe it. Just given how many people are in the US, even 10% seems like a huge number. My wife was married to an uber rich guy for 15 years, 3 destination mansions, private jets, the whole ball of wax. Guess how much fun it is flying coach with her? Anywhere? Answer, she's miserable. making the experience miserable for all around her, especially me. She's entitled at restaurants, concerts, shopping, even camping. It's her space, it's her demands. A total Karen. Dare I ask how the marriage is working out? Reading AskReddit threads where people talk about the things they ate or went without as a kid. It was always foreign to me that ramen was an actual meal for some people and not just a quick unhealthy snack. Having grown up poor, it surprises me how many people regularly ate ramen. That was a special treat at our house. My parents bought rice by the 50-pound bag, rice for dinner every night and free school breakfast and lunch. I did not grow up rich, but my husband did. His sister once said I didn't know everyone didn't live in big houses until I went off to college. Apparently she led a very sheltered life. Oh, this reminds me of a geography excursion in high school. Context: I went to a private school on a scholarship. We created a scoring system for urban areas. Things like the availability and condition of public infrastructure, roads, parks, street lighting, and ways to think about the housing stock in different places, size, upkeep, etc. We then went to the wealthiest suburb in that city, where some people rated the area just 57/100. We then went to a more standard middle to upper middle class suburb, a lower middle class suburb, and a very much poor suburb. People got quieter and quieter. Whereas they'd rank down the wealthy area for a single piece of trash, they were forced to confront that some areas didn't have amenities, and the windows on their homes were covered in newspaper. And even then, this isn't the US. The magnitude of poverty wasn't as large given the social safety nets. Frankly, it was a brilliant exercise on the part of that geography teacher. I wouldn't call my family rich by US standards, but upper middle class, so rich by world population standards. My dad grew up super poor though, so he made sure we understood how lucky we were. But to be honest, I didn't really understand until my teenage years when he took me to Costa Rica to visit where my older brother had lived for a couple years. We didn't go to the beach or touristy spots, and I got a much better idea of what poverty can look like. It made me really appreciate the luck I had being born into the family I was born into. I try to keep it in mind as I go through life, and hope my kids learn not to take their luck for granted either. It's a pet peeve of mine when people are born into wealth and act like their own wealth is 100% from their hard work. Sure, they may work hard, but never discount how much easier they had it than others born into poverty. I worked to pay for my undergraduate degree, but if I hadn't been able to one semester, my parents could have bailed me out. I don't know if they would have, but knowing they could have made it substantially less stressful. When I started talking in school about the pros and cons of Disney World versus Disneyland, and people were like, "You've been on vacation. LUCKYY. More upper middle class than rich, but we've always been quite comfortable." I really respect that my parents always made it very clear that we were incredibly lucky and that a lot of hardworking people out there don't always have much to show for it. One of my first childhood friends was from a pretty crappy part of town and had a single mom with 3 jobs. I didn't appreciate it at the time. This was kindergartenish, but I eventually realized just how different our lives were. It must have freaked my folks out to have me going over to his house in the hood during the crack epidemic, but they felt strongly that I understand how differently people's reality can be, and that effort has little to do with it. It makes me sad now, but it was an important lesson. I wish I hadn't lost contact with him. I'd like to know how he is. When I stopped being well off, we were upper middle class and had a very large nice house in a fancy part of town. Had a pool and all that. We took regular trips to Cancun or Jamaica, etc. I had every toy I ever asked for the most part, and nice clothes. I was very spoiled as an only child. My parents divorced and their money got split in half, and so we no longer had the money to live in that neighborhood or have a house that big or fancy. My mom could not afford to buy me designer or name brand clothing anymore. Money got tighter. I started getting made fun of by my former friends for not having nice clothes or things or living near them. Former friends dumped me, turned me from Regina George into a loser, I guess. It was a hard fall. I know some people like this where they think they are out of the bubble, but never ate ramen noodles for 3 months to survive. I don't think they will ever realize what it's like to live without a blanket of financial security. I mean, you don't know what it's like to walk miles and miles each day for fresh water, not knowing whether it will be available or not. I think the biggest difference people can make is trying to learn about other people's struggles and situations. Even the most privileged of us have problems, and sometimes the poorest of us are the happiest. The best thing we can do is try to understand, befriend and support the people around us, and the people we come into contact with. It's far from that simple though. Statistically, the people who have to eat nothing but ramen noodles for months on end to survive are the minority in the bubble who aren't like everyone else. At any given time, sure, but the majority of Americans are one missed paycheck away from being unable to meet basic expenses. It's not the situation that most people live their whole lives in, but the situation of needing to feed yourself for less than $5 a day for some significant stretch of time is something many people experience at least once. I'm currently on a weeks-long spree of eating ramen. I feel for your sister. Just keep enjoying those sunrises. I'm pretentious. However, you are pretty much blaming children for having responsible parents. Nobody said that, not figuratively, literally. No one even alluded to that. There was no blame being put on anyone. Your knee-jerk reaction to defend the wealthy people against being labeled wealthy is telling, however, and the implication that people are only poor if they are irresponsible. It really drives home your lack of empathy and understanding about what you're attempting to speak about. You are pretty much implying that poor people can't be responsible. Different opportunities, different situations. Local jackass says something incredibly pretentious and classist. Thinks hot take is fact. More at 11. Only rich people get to have intimate relationships and families. Gotcha. When I lost everything I had, I learnt at 21 that people have water meters. Some people actually put money into the side of the box and get water and electricity like pay as you go. I'm not rich by any means, but I realized how privileged I was that day and I haven't taken anything for granted since. Thumbs up with light skin tone. I didn't really notice until I was older that I had a somewhat privileged childhood. We always went to Europe for vacation. We owned a second home on Cape Cod. We belonged to a country club. I took golf lessons, went away to camp, played traveling league hockey act. Now I'm not able to provide quite that level of lifestyle for my own kid, and it's something I have a problem with and deal with in therapy among other things. When I started learning about globalization, people living in poverty in the US are still rich when compared to other countries throughout the world. If that's not a bubble, I don't know what is. We're all in our own bubbles, man. People living in poverty in the US are still rich when compared to other countries throughout the world. The poorest parts of the US are objectively worse than some developing countries. I grew up in 80s island recession, which was bad at the time, but then came the recession in 2008. I was pregnant with my first child. 80s seemed bad, but pretty much everyone could still buy a house where I have no chance. Plus most moms could stay at home where that's now also not possible. I have very little but frequently remind my own kids how much worse some people are in comparison to us. When I realized Americans don't have healthcare coverage through taxes, I was like, bling bling, I'm rich bitch. So you still live in that bubble then? I'm only 5 feet 1